Today we're going to read chapter 9 of War Horse. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I don't think we've tried this strategy before, but I do hear that you will be doing this in upper grades, possibly even 7th grade, to where you listen for evidence as you read and then you state a claim. Well, in this chapter, there's going to have to be a decision made about Joey, whether Joey is kept as a war horse in case they go to battle, or if he's taken in and he pulls an ambulance cart to transport injured soldiers to a medical hospital. So as I read, you're going to hear why someone named Hampton says, no, we need Joey here in case we go to battle. And then you're going to hear the military doctor tell you why he needs Joey to be an ambulance cart puller, whatever you want to call it. So I want you to listen for this evidence, and you will jot it on each side when you do your notebook entry. All right. Chapter 9. We were led away by 2 nervous soldiers, down farm tracks, through orchards, and across a bridge before being tied up beside a hospital tent some miles from where we had been captured. All right, so remember that in the last chapter, chapter 8, Top Thorn and Joey and their riders, Captain Stewart and Trooper Warren, had been captured as prisoners of war. And so now they are being taken away from Captain Stewart and Trooper Warren, and they're trying to make a decision on what needs to be done with the horses. A knot of wounded soldiers gathered around us at once. They patted and stroked us, and I began to whisk my tail with impatience. I was hungry and thirsty and angry, but I had been separated from my Trooper Warren. Still, no one seemed to know quite what to do with us until an officer in a long gray coat with a bandage around his head emerged from the tent. He was an immensely tall man, standing a full head higher than anyone around him. The manner of his gait and the way he held himself indicated a man clearly accustomed to wielding authority. A bandage came down over one eye so that he only had half a face visible, and as he walked toward us, I saw that he was limping, that one foot was heavily bandaged, and that he needed the support of a stick. The soldier sprang back at his approach and stood stiffly to attention. He looked at us both over in undisguised admiration, shaking his head and sighing as he did so. Then he turned to the man. There are hundreds like these dead out there on our lives, I tell you. If we had had one jot of the courage of these animals, we would be in the Paris by now, and not slugging it out here in the mud. These 2 horses came through hell fire to get here. They were the only 2 to make it. It was not their fault that they were sent on a fool's errand. They're not circus animals, they're heroes. Do you understand? Heroes, and they should be treated as such. And you stand around and gawk at them? None of you are badly wounded, and the doctor is far too busy to see you at present, so I want these horses unsaddled, rubbed down, fed and watered at once. They will need oats and hay and a blanket for each of them. Now get moving. So the soldiers hurried away, scattering in all directions, and within a few minutes, Topthorn and I were being lavished with all manner of clumsy kindness. None of them had handled a horse before, it seemed. But that didn't matter to us, so grateful were we for all the food they brought us and the water. We lacked for nothing that morning, and all the time the tall officer supervised from under the trees, leaning on a stick. From time to time he would come up to us and run his hand along our backs and over our quarters, nodding his approval and lecturing his men on the finer points of a horse breeding as he examined us. After a time he was joined by a man in a white coat who emerged from the tent. His hair was disheveled, his face pale with exhaustion. There was blood on his coat. All right, so he's in a white coat, and he's exhausted. There's blood on his coat. This is making me think that this is probably the veterinarian, military doctor. Headquarters phoned through about the horses, Herr Hopton, said the man in white, and they say that I am to keep them for stretcher cases. I know your view on the matter, Hopman, but I'm afraid you cannot have them. All right, so the military doctor's claim is that headquarters says to keep them for stretcher cases. That means when men have to be put on a stretcher, they have to be pulled with horses. We need them here desperately, and the way things are going, I fear we will need more. So they're very needed. They're needed desperately. When it tells us that his hair's messed up, he's like disheveled or whatever, and his face is pale, he's exhausted, this tells me that they're extremely busy trying to take care of injured soldiers. That was just the first attack. There's going to be more to come. We expect a sustained offensive. It will be a long battle. We are the same on both sides. Once we start something, we seem to have to prove a point, and that takes time and lives. We'll need all the ambulance transport we can get, motorized or horse. So they need them for ambulance transport because the war isn't over. And there will be more casualties, deaths. The tall officer drew himself up to his full height and bristled with indignation. He was a formidable sight as he advanced on the man in white. Doctor, you cannot put fine British cavalry horses to pulling carts. Any of our horse regiments, my own regiment of Lancers, would be proud. Okay, so his claim right now is that these horses are too fine to be pulling carts. Indeed, overwhelmed to have such splendid creatures in their ranks, you cannot do it. Doctor, I will not permit it. Herr Hopton, said the doctor patiently. He was clearly not at all intimidated. Do you really imagine after this morning's madness that either side will be using cavalry again in this war? Can you not understand that we need transport, Herr Hopton? All right, so his other claim is horses won't be used again. Because remember, they were saying they should have never been used to begin with because they led these horses with gunfire and to where there could be barbed wire. So you either needed to use men with ammunition or you needed to use horses. And in this case, the horses was not a good option. There were lots of casualties because of it. And we need it now. There are brave men, German and English, lying out there on stretchers in the trenches, and at present there's not enough transport to bring them back to the hospital here. All right, so again, he's saying there's not enough transport to bring in injured soldiers. So he's saying that they're needed there more than, that it's more important than just holding them back in case they're needed for cavalry, because they'll probably not be used for cavalry. All right, so I am not going to add any more to this. You can see how this is going. I want you to complete it and then state your claim on your notebook entry as I continue to read. Now, do you want them all to die, Herr Hopman? Tell me that. Do you want them to die? If these horses could be hitched up to a cart, they could bring them back in dozens. We just do not have enough ambulances to cope, and what do we have to break down or get stuck in the mud? Please, Herr Hampton, we need your help. The world, said the German officer, shaking his head, the world has gone quite mad. When noble creatures such as these are forced to become beasts of burden, the world has gone mad. But I can see that you are right. Okay, so here he gives in. I am a Lancer, Herr Doctor. But even I know that men are more important than horses. But you must see to it that you have someone in charge of these two who knows horses. I don't want any dirty-fingered mechanic getting his hand on these two. And you must tell them that they are riding horses. They won't take kindly to pulling carts, no matter how noble the cause." "Thank you, Herhampton," said the doctor. "You are most kind, but I have a problem, Herhampton, as I am sure you will agree. They will need an expert to manage them to start with, particularly if they have never been put in a cart before. The problem is that I only have medical orderlies here. True, one of them has worked horses on a farm before the war, but to tell you the truth, Herhampton, I have no one who could manage these two. No one, that is, except you. You are due to go to the base hospital on the next convoy of ambulances, but they won't be here before this evening. I know it's a lot to ask of a wounded man, but you can see how desperate I am. The farmer down below has several carts, and I should imagine all the harnesses you would need. What do you say, Herhampton? Can you help me?" The bandaged officer limped back toward us and stroked our noses tenderly, and then he smiled and nodded. "Very well. It's a sacrilege, doctor, a sacrilege," he said. "But if it's got to be done, then I'd rather do it myself and see that it's done properly." So, that same afternoon, after our capture, Topthorn and I were hitched up side by side to an old hay cart, and with the officer directing two orderlies, we were driven up through the woods back toward the thunder of the gunfire and the wounded that awaited us. Topthorn was all the time in a great state of alarm, for it was clear he had never pulled before in his life, and at last I was able in turn to help him, to lead, to compensate, and to reassure him. The officer led us at first, limping along beside me with his stick, but he was soon confident enough to mount the cart with the two orderlies and take the reins. "You've done a bit of this before, my friend," he said. "I can tell that. I always knew that British were crazy. Now that I know that they use horses, such as you as cart horses, I'm quite sure of it. That's what this war is all about, my friend. It's about which of us is the crazier. And clearly you British started with an advantage. You were crazy beforehand." All that afternoon and evening, while the battle raged, we trudged up to the lines, loaded up with the stretchers, and brought them back to the field hospital. It was several miles each way over roads and tracks filled with shell holes and littered with the corpses of mules and men. The artillery barrage from both sides was continuous. It roared overhead all day as the armies hurled their men at one another across no man's land, and the wounded that could walk poured back along the roads. I had seen the same gray faces looking out from under their helmets somewhere before. All that was different were the uniforms. They were gray now, with red piping, and the helmets were no longer round with a broad brim. It was almost night before the tall officer left us, waving goodbye to us and to the doctor from the back of the ambulance as it bumped its way across the field and out of sight. The doctor turned to the orderlies who had been with us all day. "See to it that they are well cared for, these two," he said. "They saved good lives today. Those two, good German lives and good English lives. They deserve the best of care. See to it that they have it." For the first time that night since we came to the war, Topthorne and I had the luxury of a stable. The shed in the farm that lay across the fields from the hospital was emptied of pigs and poultry, and we were let in to find a rack brimming full with sweet hay and buckets of soothing cold water. That night, after we had finished our hay, Topthorne and I were lying down together at the back of the shed. I was half awake and could think only of my aching muscles and sore feet. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and the stable was filled with a flickering orange light. Behind the light, there were footsteps. We looked up, and I was seized at that moment with a kind of panic. For a fleeting moment, I imagined myself back at home in the stable with old Zoe. The dancing light triggered off an alarm in me, reminding me at once of Albert's father. So here he's having a flashback. It's always cool if you can add flashbacks into your personal narrative as well, and talk about what's going on within inside of your head within a moment, within a seed moment, to let your reader know your thoughts. I was on my feet in an instant and backing away from the light with Topthorne beside me, protecting me. However, when the voice spoke, it was not the rasping, drunken voice of Albert's father, but rather a soft, gentle tone of a girl's voice. A young girl. I could see now that there were two people behind the light, an old man, a bent old man in rough clothes and clogs, and beside him stood a young girl, her head and shoulders wrapped in a shawl. "There you are, Grandpapa," she said. "I told you that they put 'em in here. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? Oh, can they be mine, Grandpapa? Please, can they be mine?" So we end the chapter on a good note that looks like that Joey and Topthorne may have a little girl, as their next best friend to take care of them. They're being taken care of. They feel like they're like in a luxury hotel for these two horses based on what their living quarters have been. So for the moment, we're in a good place in our book. Now, basically, I wrote down the notes that you needed to take as far as textual evidence. So have this written down in your notebook entry, add a little bit to it, and then state your claim whether or not that you think it's a good idea to use Joey as a military stretcher, cart puller, or ambulance transport, or if you think he's too fine a horse for that, and if he should just be kept just in case he's needed for cavalry. How do you think he could best be used to assist the military? Have fun doing your work.